everyone and y'all. Welcome to the first ever special edition BitCast episode, y'all. I am so excited. Today we are here to celebrate Apple's 50th anniversary, y'all. And I am so excited. We have a lot in store for that. Now, this podcast is going to be dedicated to Apple's 50th anniversary. But there is a few things I want to talk about Nintendo related. The Mario Galaxy movie came out today. Tomorrow at the time of recording this. I will be seeing it this weekend, and I'm going to have a whole big video about that. But I want to talk about this. What in the world is this? So, if you don't know, Nintendo revealed that Fox McCloud / Star Fox is going to be in the Super Mario Galaxy movie. Now, people who have already seen it are going to know how this rolls out, but I am very weirded out by this. I'm mainly mad that they spoiled the whole thing. I'm like, come on, Nintendo. One of my friends has a theory that this is an April Fool jokes. I don't believe that. I don't think it is, but who knows at this rate? So, I'm very disgusted right now by Nintendo because they're spoiling their own movie. But I've heard some people theorize that there's going to be post-credit scene with Star Fox, whatever, and he's going to be a main character apparently, from what I know. All I'm saying is I hope we see Samus and in like a post-credit scene, maybe even a Metroid movie. I don't think that will happen, unfortunately, but who knows? So anyways, I just wanted to cover that small little bit of news for you all. But as you know, as the title, as whatever you want to call it, that ain't going to be the main focus for today. The main focus for today is going to be Apple's 50th anniversary. Alright, let's get into it.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers.
An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not three separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone.
The round pegs in the square holes. The ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo.
This is the new MacBook Air, and you can get a feel for how thin it is. Yeah, there it is.
You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them.
And we call it M1.
Because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Yes, everyone. It is Apple's 50th anniversary. Today, April 1st, 2026, marks 50 years since the start of Apple. From the garage all the way to now. Apple has come, literally such a long way. And in preparation for the anniversary, just taking a look back has just been such a inspiring and honest, sentimental in a lot of ways moment for me, looking back at the product launches and the different things that were happening, not only just with the products but the state of Apple. I mean, Apple at one point literally was about to go bankrupt. They were deep in, but then somehow the company got saved. Mostly because of Tim Cook. Back when he got hired, he knew business. But looking at that one point of time in history and just looking at now, it's like, wow, Apple has come such a long way. We have the iPhone, the Mac, the Apple Watch, the AirPods, all of these different things. That's not even all of them, that have honestly revolutionized a lot of things. And just looking back, watching the old Steve Jobs keynotes videos have just been so amazing. Just seeing the atmosphere of history. And in our current world of AI and a lot of people feeling that hardware upgrades are very minimal, we get a new iPhone every year now, and we may get a better camera, bigger battery life, and occasionally a big redesign, but everything hasn't been too innovative. Now, I say everything there because there have been some ultra innovative revolutions by Apple in the past 5 years, which we'll talk about. But looking back and just imagining the atmosphere back, just putting myself in a seat in that crowd back at, I think it was Macworld 2007, before Apple reinvented the smartphone with the iPhone, just thinking about that atmosphere of this huge change and knowing where we are now, what a massive ultra impact that it will make on the tech world ever. I mean, looking back at 2007, the iPhone was a new product from Apple. And yes, there were smartphones, but they were clunky, they were ugly, they had that physical keyboard, they didn't have touch screens. And when you watch that keynote talking about this new product, of course they're going to say it's revolutionary because it's Apple, but looking back now and seeing that quite literally every modern smartphone still has DNA from the original iPhone is honestly one of the most incredible things, just thinking about that. So today, in honor of 50 years of Apple, which is honestly, when I look at my Apple products today, I don't think of a 50-year-old company. But it is, and it's honestly hard to believe. I feel like sometimes with all the new product releases and everything, we honestly forget about how Apple used to be. And honestly, it's almost been like rediscovering that magical charm of Apple, the think different standpoint. And one thing I also want to talk about is how some of Apple's more recent moves has kind of brought back that feeling and that slogan of think different. I mean, Apple even said 50 years of thinking different. And honestly, it's given me kind of a new lens looking at all the product releases of all the things that Apple did and still does different. thinking different, not doing the exact same thing. And sure, Apple has copied a lot from other companies, but so has other companies. I mean, the original iPhone, all these other companies took that core DNA of the original iPhone into their current phones. Phones 20 years later, because next year is the 20-year anniversary of the iPhone. Phones 20 years later. The Macintosh, the first mainstream personal computer with a graphical user interface. And now you look here, in 2026, all computers, Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Chrome OS, every type of OS is all a graphical user interface. It's honestly just so cool thinking about that. And looking at Apple products today and what they were back then, and really focusing on the atmosphere of that time has been something truly special. So today we are going to be reminiscing about all these Apple products, and I have prepared a keynote made in Apple Keynote. I mean, it's Apple's 50th anniversary, and I didn't just do that because it's Apple's 50th anniversary. I did that because I actually just normally use Keynote. So, I mean, yeah. Anyway, so I did make a Keynote, and I'm just making sure everything's working because I've had some issues with capturing, so hopefully nothing goes wrong here. But anyways, I presented to you 50 years of Apple. We are going to be going over the 8 most iconic and innovative Apple products over the past 50 years, according to me, according to what I think. Okay, don't take it personally. This is just, and some of it also is just normal common sense. But yeah. Honestly, 50 though, like thinking about it, 50 years of Apple is unreal. It's something that does not calculate in my brain. Of course, I wasn't there from the beginning, but I have seen Apple change so much, and just looking back has been amazing. So, like I said, we are going to go over the top 8 most iconic and innovative Apple products from the past 50 years of Apple, which is crazy to say. We're going to go from worst to best, so we'll start at number 8. Alright, y'all, so according to me, the number 8 most iconic and best Apple product is the iPhone X era. Now, I know this isn't really an Apple product if I'm saying era, but mainly the iPhone X, but also the era that followed it, because the iPhone X DNA is still in the current iPhones to this day. So, going back to 2017, the iPhone X was one of the biggest moments, not as much for me, but because I wasn't into it really that much back then. But I remember thinking of the iPhone X as this, like, unreal product. One of those things where it's like so out of reach that it's so high above you. Okay, that allegation's a bit weird, but you get my point. I thought this was like the biggest innovation ever back then when it came out. Which, I mean, it really was a big thing. The iPhone X was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, updates to the iPhone. It came with a completely new, revolutionary new design that changed how the iPhone will look for the next almost 10 years. Will be 10 years next year, which is, oh my word, it's going to be 10 years next year. That is unreal. It also had a new authentication with Face ID and a new control method for iOS with gesture control, which at the time was so new, but now it's just core to us people who use normal iPhones. And just reflecting back at that period of time and also what came after it, I still remember the iPhone 11 Pro. Y'all, that was one of the most iconic things. I still remember watching it, and just the fact that it had 3 cameras was like groundbreaking to me, y'all. Like, today, those cameras are trash, but back then, to me, that was literally groundbreaking. Like, honestly, it was so amazing to me to have 3 cameras. And I remember watching all the reviews of the iPhone 11 Pro and seeing the camera and being like, this thing is the best phone ever. This is like beyond what a phone can and should be able to do, and I wanted it so bad. I eventually ended up getting the regular base iPhone 11 back in 2021. It was my first new Apple product. That was before I had, so I just used it basically as a glorified iPod. And I remember loving that phone so much. And I feel like for me, the iPhone 11 was the pivotal, experience for me. But, that was inspired by the 10, because the iPhone X or 10 has the DNA for the iPhone 11. And that was just such a really good experience or moment in Apple history. But that's only number 8, because while it's special, it wasn't like the most special. So yes, now let's move on to the top 7th most iconic product. Quick reminder, if you forgot, go to the hospital, you have some memory issues. But the top 8 product was the iPhone 10 era. So now, let's move on to the 7th most iconic and innovative product from Apple. Again, according to me. I shouldn't have to keep saying this. But that product is the iPhone 5. Oh my word. Oh, I loved this phone so much. Alright, so let's put ourselves in that atmosphere back then. Now, on the surface, this phone is not some big, innovative, or revolutionary product or anything. It was a big change, especially for the display. It got significantly bigger, which was very controversial at the time. But now we have phones that are as big as a tablet, or like 20 times bigger than this. So it obviously worked well. It also had a significantly faster A6 chip and a better camera. Now, this is not revolutionary or some big new product, but the reason why it's so dear to me is because this was my first technology or digital device ever. At first, it was just a phone that my family member had and would let me use every once in a while, and then I actually was able to have it as a glorified iPod. But this was the first one, and oh my word, I love this phone so much. It brings so many amazing memories to me. the iconic design with the slate gray. It was just such a great phone. I had this phone for a long time. I put it through absolute abuse. In fact, by the end of it, the top half of the display was missing because I was playing with it and I dropped it and the top half of the display fell off and it shattered everywhere. But somehow it still worked. The display still worked. The digitizer was going out, so I would tape it. I made this thing last so much. I don't know how it worked by the end of it, but I loved this phone. And of course, it is going to just have such a sentimental place for me since it was my first iPhone ever. So, and that's one of the beauty things about iPhones. It may not be revolutionary, but it might be for you because it might be your first experience. So maybe that was iPhone 6 for you or iPhone 10, or maybe it was the first iPhone, which I can't imagine how revolutionary that would be to not have a phone or to have a garbage smartphone back in 2007 and get the iPhone. That must have been absolutely just revolutionary. So while the iPhone 5 isn't extreme revolutionary, it earns its place on my list just because of its sentimental value. But alright, moving on to the sixth most iconic and revolutionary Apple product, which is the iMac G3. I think this one's going to resonate for a lot of people. I never had this computer. I wasn't alive when it came out, but I've watched a ton of videos about it, and it is such a cool computer. I would genuinely love to get one of these one day, to just collect one of these and just kind of dip into the history of it. Honestly, Apple history is so fascinating and iconic to me, and I feel like the iMac G3 is one of the key markers in Apple history. It had a unseen design at the time, which broke up, and honestly, the iMac G3 helped save Apple when Steve Jobs came back to the company. And it was an all-in-one computer. It could do a bunch of stuff, and it had that iconic design, and it sold so well, and it's what made the iMac what it is today. I think looking down the road of the iMac in general, you cannot argue the iMac G3 is definitely the most iconic iMac in my opinion. Like, I don't think you can argue that. And I genuinely, if I had the money, I definitely in the future though want to get one of these. I mean, that would make such a great video. I actually bought an iPhone 5S. I should have talked about this with the 5S, but I actually bought an iPhone 5S, made a video about it back before I was public, and it was just so iconic. It kind of re-experiencing my original iPhone, even though it wasn't the 5, it was the 5S. The 5S was a significant update, but still. So while I never had the iMac G3, I still think it's the most iconic iMac ever. All right, so moving on to number 5, the 5th most iconic Apple product and an innovative Apple product ever. One thing you'll know is that there's a mix. The iMac G3 was pretty innovative, but wasn't as much as the others, but it was so iconic. Same with the 5. But then you had the iPhone, which is ultra innovative and also ultra iconic. So, yeah. All right, so the fifth most iconic and innovative Apple product of all time is the iPod. Now, I have not had one of the original iPods with this type of layout, but without a doubt, there are certain products that when you think of Apple, you think of that product. Now, today, when you think of Apple, you're not going to think about the iPod because that was killed off a long time ago. But back in the day, into Steve Jobs' day, when you thought about Apple, you thought about the iPod because the iPod was one of, again, the most iconic Apple products. The 1,000 songs in your pocket quote is just such a good quote. In my opinion, I think the iPod was the best MP3 player at its time. It had a large capacity, amazing design, and a unique user interface. So, I've never had one. I did have a 6th generation iPod Touch, though. I do feel like, though, the iPod was just so iconic, especially with kids. The Touch, the iPod Nano, and Shuffle. And I feel like the iPod really embraces the think different aspect of Apple. And I really... I wish Apple didn't kill off the iPod, but it makes sense. I mean the iPhone is technically an iPod because Steve Jobs says a phone, an iPod, so all in one. So technically your iPhone is an iPod, but this one, it's not time. It's not in its own time. But again, looking back at the history, it is just such a revolutionary and iconic product. Also, one thing you'll notice is that the keynote styles, they kind of change between what time. The older ones have the classic Steve Jobs era keynote. In fact, I'm pretty sure that this keynote template is the exact keynote template they use. It's still in keynote to this day, which is so fun and cool in my opinion. So, yeah, that is the 5th product, but y'all, we're moving up the list because next we are going to talk about the 4th most iconic Apple product ever. Wow, we're actually running through this. We're going to reminisce on all of them when we're done, by the way, but yeah, the 4th most iconic and innovative Apple product ever is the Macintosh. I think this is obvious because this is what really kicked off Apple. I feel like today a lot of people think of the iPhone, but back in the day before the iPhone, this would have been number 1 on the list. Just like the iPhone, though, it wasn't the first computer with a graphical user interface, but just like the iPhone, it was the computer that revolutionized or reinvented the modern day computer with a graphical user interface. It was the first mainstream computer with a graphical user interface. And I find it so fascinating seeing the product that invented something that I use to this day and rely on. I use my MacBook and macOS every day, and I rely on it. And it's so amazing and fascinating for me looking back almost 50 years down the road, seeing what invented that, where it was born. And just looking at the iconicness of this again is one of those machines like the iMac G3 that I would love to get my hands on to this day. Experience what the first Mac OS is like. Experience what that tech was like. See what it can do and the differences and compare it and find the place where it was all born. I think it's important looking back at where things started, and the Macintosh, which was then the Mac, transformed into the Mac to what we know today. Again, it has that core DNA of modern day computers, just like the iPhone. And it's honestly so amazing. So yes, this definitely deserves to be high up on the list. But the next two things are going to be something unexpected, and I feel like there might be some disagreements, but I personally think this deserves to be one of the most revolutionary things made by Apple ever. And I should have transitioned, but we're talking about the third most revolutionary and innovative product. These next two products, they're iconic, technically, because they're not that old, actually. But they are some of the most innovative products, and they're still innovating to this day. And the industry still has not catched up to this day. And I am, of course, talking about Apple Silicon. So, in particular, Mac Apple Silicon, because Apple has been making their own silicon since shortly after the first iPhone. I believe the iPhone 4, it was either the iPhone 3GS or iPhone 4 was the first phone with an Apple Silicon chip. And then the iPad had the Apple Silicon chip. And then the watch had the Apple Silicon chip. But the Mac Apple Silicon chip, in my opinion, is the most revolutionary one. And that is because it is so innovative. It uses the ARM architecture. And Apple has been able to innovate so much, not only with just the M1, but then we have the Pro chip, the Max chip, and the Ultra chip. Literally, the M5 Max is the fastest CPU in the world. That is unreal. In literally every release of Apple Silicon, I still am breathtaken of the amount of inhumane performance that Apple has managed to pack in there with great efficiency. Now, the M1 revolution is something I greatly remember. I used to be a Windows user, and I remember after the M1 chip came out, and I feel like when we truly discovered its potential, I still remember that feeling of, oh my goodness, Apple has just started a revolution here. This is the best computer chip ever. And I think it's so amazing that still, to this day, oh my word, computer, shut up. I am so sorry about that. Rural interlude. Recommendation of the day, don't buy an Alexa device. They listen in on to you. That is the second time today it's just randomly picked up on my conversation and started talking. Anyways, I think it is so amazing that to this day, Apple Silicon is still leading the revolution, and it's still crushing limits. which really just shows how revolutionary this was. And beyond all of the revolutionization, not just for Apple, but for the entire computer industry, crushing Windows, crushing Intel, and AMD, and all these other companies, it also saved the Mac. The Mac was struggling. The Mac was dying. Intel chips, they weren't optimized. $1,000 Macs of the newest generation were so slow, hot, buggy, they never worked, to the point where the base level M1 was whipping them in almost every way. And I had always wanted a Mac, but genuinely, if I had the knowledge that I have today back then, I couldn't really recommend a Mac to someone. Windows was better back then too, but now that Windows has gotten worse and the M1 chip saved the Mac, without a doubt, especially with the MacBook Neo, Mac all the way. Mac all the way. And the M1 chip, I cannot express how revolutionary this was. All right. Now, we're moving into top 2 territory, y'all. Can y'all guess what the first thing is? Now, remember how I said the next 2 products are revolutionary? Well, top 3 and 2 actually are related, because in my opinion, the second most innovative and revolutionary products, plural products for this one, is not just Apple Silicon, but Macs with Apple Silicon. That is right. Macs with Apple Silicon, in my opinion, is the number one, getting ahead of myself, the second most innovative and iconic Apple products ever. The chip is what revolutionized it, but that revolutionary chip reflects so much in the products. Not only did it supercharge them, but we got redesigns across the globe. The redesigned and the most pro MacBook Pro with M1 Pro and Max. I still remember that. The Mac was back because it got rid of the Tim Cook, Johnny Ive type of design and went with the big daddy John Turnus design, as I will call it. The amazing redesign, the outrageous performance, more connectivity, amazing display with ultra thin bezels, and then we got the redesigned MacBook Air with the outrageous performance and a very similar new design with MagSafe. MagSafe is back, which MagSafe is legendary, by the way. And then we got the Mac Studio with the ultra chips, and we got even the M1 Air, and honestly, most recently, the MacBook Neo really reflects that thinking different standpoint. It's doing something other competitors cannot do. These computers are some of the best computers ever to this day, because this is something that competitors simply can't top. For the price, for the performance, for the design, for the feature set, competitors cannot top Apple Silicon computers. And with the hype around the MacBook Neo, it really shows that thinking different. It's like Apple's back. The advertising scheme that we've been seeing with the Finder Guide, which I love. The Mac was back with the M1, but I feel like now the Mac is even more back, and Think Different is back again too. I genuinely feel like the MacBook Neo has started a new thought process, and I actually think this feeling of thinking different started back with the iPhone Air. I'm just going to be honest, and I think that's going to continue throughout this year. But I think that the MacBook Neo is absolutely the essence of thinking different, because just the design, the performance, what they did is just something that no one else can do. And I feel like with their marketing and what they've been doing lately, I think they are bringing that back. It truly does feel like 50 years of thinking different. And what makes this so iconic is what Apple did in the past. The Think Different campaign was a lot bolder back then. And one of Apple's boldest products that really impacts that is what we're talking about next, and is the number one, the big one. This is the product that is inscribed into the history books of Apple. It is what, to this day, you'll still think of when you think of Apple. And without further ado, that product is the iPhone. Yes, the most revolutionary and iconic Apple product, according to me, is the iPhone. Let's put ourselves in that seat. At the time, most people still had flip phones, and even the smartphones were these ugly blocks with a clunky keyboard, a low resolution, tiny display that was not touch and was not revolutionary at all. But then Apple comes along and reinvents the phone. Now your phone is a beautiful design for that time. It's ugly right now. I think it's kind of ugly. It's not ugly. It's still so iconic. Anyways, it's a big, high-resolution touchscreen. You had a camera, but the most iconic part about it was that it was an iPod, a phone, and a breakthrough internet communication device all in one. Those were not three separate devices, as Steve Jobs said. And once the App Store hit, it was a revolutionary product. Like I've been saying, that there's still the core DNA of this original iPhone in every single phone to this day. My iPhone 15 Pro, has the DNA of this product. And this just embodies thinking different so much. Because back at that time, people thought it was ridiculous not to have a built-in keyboard. People thought it was ridiculous to have a touch screen. People mocked Apple for this. But it was so different. Steve Jobs and Apple were truly thinking different about the iPhone. And just like in that commercial, in the little video we watched at the beginning, the ones who think they can change the world are the ones that do, the ones that think different. Look what this did. The iPhone has truly changed the world because its DNA is still strongly reflected in every modern smartphone to this day. There's been new innovations, and the DNA is changing with folding phones and new designs. But this has started a 20-plus year legacy of what a phone should be. And some at the time would say corny slogan of reinventing the phone has proven itself true over the past 20 years. Well, 19 years, but will be 20 years next year. And is honestly just so amazing. And of course, it's the most iconic product, but just looking at all of the products that we have talked about today, going back in the history books, really just shows the true thinking different standpoint. And I have to admit, I used to not understand it because everything looked similar. But now that I look back at this and see what the competition is doing, It's perfectly clear. I could encourage y'all to look back in the history. And hopefully this bonus episode of the podcast has really showed you a good look back in the history. But overall, those are the top 8 most iconic Apple products to me. Also, I would just like to make a statement. This podcast is entirely produced using Apple products. I'm currently recording this on my M3 MacBook Air, and I do most of the production on that computer. So designing, uploading, editing, all of that. I'm also using Steam Deck Mobile, which is running off my iPhone, which is right next to me. That's how I've been controlling the podcast this whole time. And okay, so my microphone isn't Apple. It's okay, and my headphones are okay. But the main part is, you get the point. The main part of this podcast setup is run off Apple products, and I used to use Windows, and when I got my Mac, there's no going back. Windows is so bad now that I think Mac is honestly the best and best alternative to Windows. And I think the Mac is going to take off even more. The MacBook Neo, I think, is a start of a new era for Apple, and I think it's going to be legendary. And oh man, just thinking 50 years is honestly unreal. And wow, y'all, this podcast episode is already 46 minutes. This is the longest podcast episode, and it's just a bonus one, but you know what? It's bonus. So yeah, that, by the way, just when I mean bonus, it's a bonus. So there will be a normal podcast episode on Friday. So stay tuned for that. I will be seeing the Mario movie. I will be making a video about it. Also have a normal weekly video and an Easter video. And thank you for sticking around for this podcast journey, looking back at the past 50 years of Apple. Anyways, you all, thanks for joining me on this special episode, and I will see y'all in the next one.